There is a moment the narcissist never wants to admit, but they feel it deeply, the moment they realize you're never coming back. Not when you scream, not when you cry, but when you go silent, when you no longer need explanations, when you stop trying to understand, to forgive, or to fix things. And it's that calm, not loud, not dramatic, that breaks them from within. Because to a narcissist, your emotions were the fuel that fed their obsessive ego. And when you take that away, not in anger, not in revenge, but simply in freedom, they realize the game is over. This video is not about blaming or labeling someone a monster. It's a safe space for you to reflect on your journey with clarity. We're going to explore the pivotal moment when the balance of power shifts, not through confrontation, but through internal awakening. And if you've ever had to walk away from a toxic relationship, if you've ever felt erased from the story of your own life, then this video is for you. Hit subscribe if you're on a healing journey, and watch until the end, because every minute here will not only help you understand them, but help you reclaim the power that was once taken from you. You didn't just walk away, you woke up. And that awakening is something they can never forgive, not because of what it says about you, but because of what it says about them. Imagine a puppet held up by delicate strings. For a long time it believes its movements are natural, that the bowing, the waving, the smiling are all its own choices. Then one day, a strong wind snaps a string, then another, and for the first time, the puppet is still, and in that stillness, it begins to understand what freedom truly is. That story is you. In the moment you stopped reacting to the narcissist. No more arguments, no more justifications, no more tears or longing. And that is the moment that terrifies them the most. Not because they've lost you, but because they've lost control over you. You need to understand this. A narcissist doesn't feed on love, they feed on reaction. Every angry message you sent, every tear you shed hoping they'd understand. Those were signs that they still held power. But when you withdraw your attention, when you are no longer the mirror reflecting their distorted ego, everything crumbles. And here's the solution no one tells you. It's not about defeating them with logic, it's about stepping out of the game entirely. It's not silence as retaliation. It's silence as a conscious choice. Because when you become grounded, when you no longer need them to define your worth, the game ends. That's the moment they realize you're not coming back. Not because you're running away, but because you've come home to yourself. And once you've stepped out of that game, a new question always arises. How do you protect the freedom you've just discovered? Because silence isn't the end. It's the beginning of a new journey. The journey of rebuilding yourself from pieces once distorted by control and manipulation. Carl Jung, the great psychologist, once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." You used to think you were too sensitive, too emotional, too hard to love, but the truth is you were conditioned to believe that. And when you stop, when you're no longer being led by subtle jabs, double meanings, or psychological games, you begin to step away from the script the narcissist wrote for you. What you need now isn't confrontation, it's to re-establish boundaries from within. A real boundary isn't saying, "I'm done," or posting an angry status on social media. A real boundary is when you no longer react the way you used to. It's when they text you and you feel no urge to reply. It's when they talk about the new one and you don't feel replaced. It's when you understand deeply your silence isn't weakness, it's power. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a leading expert on narcissistic personality disorder, once said, "The best revenge is moving on, with indifference. It's the thing narcissists can't stand, not mattering. They'll try to come back. They'll bait you with emotion. They'll play the victim, the remorseful one, the awakened version of themselves. But you know better than anyone, the one who's truly awakened is you. And from that moment on, you're no longer someone who reacts. You become someone who chooses. You choose peace over chaos. You choose freedom over being pulled like a puppet. You choose truth over a counterfeit love built on pity and fear. If you're on a journey of rebirth after emotional damage, hit subscribe and stay with this video until the end, not just to understand others, but to understand yourself more deeply, and to learn how to protect the most sacred part of you, your peace. You've left the stage. Now it's time to write your own script. First, let's be clear about one thing. Boundaries aren't just statements you post on social media. Boundaries are a life decision, an internal system you choose to live by every single day. They're not a tool to force others to change. They're a daily reminder to yourself that you have changed, that you're no longer the version of you who tolerated being controlled, who sacrificed yourself to keep the peace, who gave up self-respect in the desperate hope of being loved. A boundary is not a wall built from fear. It's a foundation built from self-love. And if you want to create boundaries that are truly unbreakable, especially after being in a relationship with a narcissist, you must build them from core values, not fleeting emotions. Don't draw boundaries when you're angry, hurt, or overwhelmed, because that's when you're most likely to bend, retreat, or justify. Set boundaries when your mind is clear, when you can see exactly what's being draining you day after day, and when you're ready to choose inner freedom over external approval. For example, instead of thinking, "I'm not talking to them because I'm angry," you say, "I choose not to engage with someone who manipulated me, not because I hate them, but because I love myself more." And once your boundary is set, do not fall into the trap of explaining or negotiating it. A boundary is not a democratic debate, it is a personal declaration. If you feel the need to convince others that your boundary is reasonable, you're still chasing approval from the very person who once hurt you. A true boundary is when you no longer need anyone's permission to protect yourself. Alongside this, you must train emotional discipline, because narcissists always return. They will accidentally resurface memories, test your empathy, or pretend they've changed, just to see if you're still susceptible to the old loop. And you need to be prepared not to fight, but to stand firm. Not reacting is strength. Refusing to perform anymore is an act of freedom. You'll begin to realize that in order to stay free from emotional cycles, you must build an entirely new internal system. You no longer live to avoid conflict or to be loved. You live from values. If you are someone who values honesty, you speak truth, even if it disappoints others. If you value strength, you say no, even when keeping the peace would be easier. And when you live from values, you clearly recognize the emotional hooks narcissist throws out, the guilt, the scarcity, the fear of abandonment. They know your weak points. But when you know yourself better than they do, you'll see the hook for what it is, and you won't bite. You name it, you walk away from it, consciously, decisively. At the same time, you must rewire your internal value system, no longer measuring yourself by who loves me, who forgives me, or who thinks I'm a good person. Your new metrics are, am I being honest with myself today? Is my energy invested in what truly matters? Am I living like someone who is worthy of love, even if no one else says it out loud? And then you'll finally understand the narcissist doesn't fear losing you, they fear losing their power to manipulate you. They fear you becoming someone they can no longer control, a person with clear boundaries, who no longer reacts according to the script the narcissist is used to, and who lives according to their own values instead of seeking validation. That is who they fear the most. And in the next part of this video, I'll share a simple yet powerful 3-step framework to help you reinforce your personal identity every single day, even if you're still required to interact with the narcissist in your life, whether they're a co-worker, a family member, or a co-parent. If you want to protect the deepest and most beautiful parts of yourself, stay with me, because you deserve a life that is no longer governed by anyone else's control. But even after leaving a toxic relationship, that doesn't necessarily mean you've escaped the narcissist's influence. For many, daily contact is unavoidable, whether as a co-parent, a family member, or someone you work with. And in that environment, if you don't actively and systematically reinforce your sense of self, it's dangerously easy to be pulled back into old patterns. What you need now isn't a wall to hide behind, it's inner strength, a version of yourself that cannot be shaken. In psychology, this is known as self-anchoring, a vital strategy that helps people avoid losing themselves amid external pressure. It means you must tether yourself to a solid internal center, one built on your own values, not on anyone else's emotions, opinions, or manipulations. The first step is to start each day with an identity declaration. You don't say, "Today I'll try not to get angry." You say, "I am calm." You don't think, "I won't let them hurt me today." You affirm, "My emotions are not in their hands." Dr. Kristin Neff, a pioneer in self-compassion research, once said, "When we anchor ourselves in our own worth, external criticism loses its power. When you ground yourselves in your own internal value, outside opinions become meaningless. Reminding yourself every morning of who you are before the world tries to assign you an identity is a deeper form of self-protection than any wall you could build. The second step is to create an untouchable inner sanctuary, a space within you that you can return to any time you feel emotionally triggered, manipulated, or pulled into old wounds. This is the part of you that doesn't need to react, explain, or prove anything. It could be as simple as a mantra, "I don't need to respond right now," or "My emotions are mine." Dr. Judith Herman, a leading expert in trauma recovery, once said, "The core experience of trauma is disempowerment, and the core experience of recovery is reclaiming control." Trauma takes away your sense of agency. Healing begins when you take it back, when you reclaim your right to protect your peace without guilt. The final step is to end each day with a value-elliptic reflection. Not to ask, "Did I do everything right?" but "Did I stay true to myself?" Before you go to sleep, ask, "Did I honor my values today? Did I allow someone to pressure me into betraying myself just to be accepted?" And if the answer is yes, don't shame yourself. Be honest. Know that tomorrow you will show up stronger. Little by little, you are reshaping your identity, not one that depends on being liked or understood, but one that no longer needs to react in order to feel real. The most important truth you must remember is this: the narcissist doesn't fear losing you. They fear you becoming someone they can no longer control. They fear your silence. They fear your stability. They fear your clarity. They fear the version of you who is free, who no longer asks for permission to exist, to speak, or to be whole. And when you reach that place, they'll know, deeply and bitterly, that you're never coming back. Not because you want revenge, but because you've grown, you've awakened, and you've chosen a life that finally, fully belongs to you. But the journey back to yourself doesn't end with reclaiming your identity. It requires something even deeper. Unwavering vigilance against the subtle tactics the narcissist will use to pull you back into the same emotional quicksand. Because when you start to become grounded, when they can no longer control your reactions, they don't simply walk away. On the contrary, that's exactly when they activate their survival mode. Narcissists do not accept the loss of control as reality. They see it as a direct threat to their ego, and as a result, they will do everything possible to drag you back to your former position, vulnerable, reactive, emotionally pliable. They may return with an emotional apology, a long message recounting a tragic childhood or a performance of a spiritual awakening, claiming they've gone to therapy, changed, understood everything. But remember this: the more words they use, the less real change there usually is. Dr. Craig Malkin, author of Rethinking Narcissism, warned, "Narcissists are experts at mimicking change. What they want is not healing. What they want is access. They don't want healing. They want access. Access back into your heart and mind, so they can once again manipulate your emotions. The most common tactic they use is to target your compassion. They know you are someone who cares deeply, someone who once tried to understand them, forgive them, endure them, because you believed they could change. So they feign weakness, loss, and loneliness. They recreate the image of a wounded soul to make you soften. And if you haven't fully reinforced your internal values, you're at risk, not because you still love them, but because you still believe it's your responsibility to help them become a better version of themselves. But remember this, you are not obligated to save the one who repeatedly dragged you under. Healing is never a one-way street, and compassion without boundaries will always be the exact weakness the narcissist exploits. They don't care about your actual feelings. What they care about is whether you're still soft enough for them to slip back in. They don't regret hurting you. They regret losing a source of emotional supply that once made them feel powerful. And the more silent you become, the better you live, the less you respond, the more dangerous they become in their false sweetness. Sometimes they won't come back directly. They'll do it through others. A mutual friend who suddenly checks in, a random message from an old account, or a family member telling you they're really hurting since you left. All of it is part of a carefully crafted emotional trap designed to test how solid you really are. They don't necessarily want the relationship back. They just want to know whether they still have access to your mind. You must understand this. Even a single conversation can be the open door they're waiting for. One reply, one closure meeting, one moment of pity. That's all it takes to re-enter the loop. In psychology, this is called trauma reenactment, the unconscious repetition of pain. When you go back even for one small interaction with someone who once made you lose yourself, you aren't just giving back power, you're teaching your nervous system that trauma is acceptable. So vigilance is essential, not to live in fear, but to live in awareness. Because you've worked far too hard to reclaim the peace you now have, and no one, no matter how sweet they seem, has the right to take that away from you. Hold on to this truth. You don't need to be angry, you don't need revenge, and you don't need to prove anything. You just need to not go back. Your silence is the strongest declaration that you've awakened, and that, for the first time, you've fully chosen yourself. And now, pause for a moment and look back. You didn't just walk away from a relationship. You walked away from a finely tuned system of manipulation, a system that convinced you love meant enduring, that forgiveness meant silence, that keeping the peace meant losing parts of yourself. You survived days when your identity was twisted, your emotions controlled, and your presence only valued when it served someone else's ego. Walking away from that wasn't just a breakup, it was a psychological rebirth, and no one understands that better than you do. Victory isn't when the narcissist realizes you're not coming back. In fact, whether they get it or not is no longer relevant. Victory is when you no longer need them to see you in order to know you're worthy. It's when you wake up in the morning no longer waiting, no longer needing external validation to feel whole. It's when you start acting from what's right, not from fear of abandonment or the hope that someone will finally see who you really are. That is what real freedom looks like. Not the freedom to walk away from someone, but the freedom to live fully with yourself. Healing after trauma doesn't come in loud moments. It happens in quiet choices. When you read an old message and no longer feel pain. When their name shows up and your heart doesn't race. When a song that once broke you no longer makes you turn it off. That's when you know you've transformed. Not into someone cold, but into someone with boundaries, with depth, and with an emotional compass that can no longer be hijacked by fleeting emotion. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." You are not your past. You are who you choose to become after everything. And that choice, every day, is an act of courage. In a world that constantly demands your reaction, your compliance, your compromise, saying, "I choose myself," is a revolutionary act. You don't need to shout, "I survived." You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You just need to keep living. Truthfully, deeply, with full awareness of your worth and your limits. Every step you take toward the light is a quiet but powerful refusal of the darkness the narcissist once tried to bury you in. And if one day they return, trying to resurrect what once was, you don't need to slam the door theatrically. You just need to stand still, with the peace of someone who knows exactly what deserves to remain in their life. You don't go back, not because you're angry, but because you're moving forward, and where you're going they no longer matter. If you're in the middle of this journey, or just taking your first steps, trust this: healing doesn't happen all at once. But every day you choose yourself, you break an old pattern and write a new story. And if you ever need a reminder of your strength, come back here. Watch this video again. Because sometimes the only thing you need to keep moving forward is a voice that gently reminds you, you are enough, and you're doing beautifully.